Some of the best kart racers of all time are the Sonic and Sega All-Stars racing games, or the Sonic and All-Stars racing games. Knowing what to call the series is a little bit confusing. They're kart racers made up of all kinds of Sega characters, with a pretty noticeable bias towards Sonic, hence the title, but hey, it's Sega, that's what they like to do. They were pretty good, one got a cameo in Breaking Bad, and fun was had by all. But looking back on them, they're interesting for the time they were released in because it's very different to how Sega would do a crossover racer now. I mean, two of Sega's flagship series, by their own admission, Yakuza and Persona, were nowhere to be found. And Sega didn't even own Atlas at the time. Plus, for some reason, Puyo Puyo doesn't have any representation. I don't know, there were some weird choices in the roster as well. Like Zobio and Zobiko, which act as the representatives for House of the Dead, but good luck asking the average gamer what game in particular they're from. That's why I find it interesting to see ideas for what the roster of playable characters in a third game would be like. In this new era of Sega we're in, and in fact I have my own concept I like to present in this video. This is my proposal for how a hypothetical Sonic and Sega All-Stars 3 should look like. Yes, I'm gonna go back to calling it Sonic and Sega All-Stars, not Sonic and All-Stars, cause I'm not exactly gonna have the weird list of guest characters Sonic and All-Stars Transformed had. Sorry, Wreck-It Ralph fans. From a certain point of view, however, there sort of already is a successor to the series, a Sega racing game also developed by Sumo Digital called Team Sonic Racing. This time it's only got Sonic characters, but the game has one big part of the roster I want to include, the teams. That game had its Sonic characters all put into a team of 3, and roster picks were done accordingly. So I'm going to bridge the gap between that and the approach taken by Sonic and Sega All-Stars by making a Sonic and Sega game with the team-based roster of Team Sonic Racing. Yeah, by the way, the word Sonic appears 39 times in the script, in case you were curious. And, you know, it's just too easy for me to make a list of characters and add them to a roster like a normal person. This means that teams will have to have a theme or an in-universe reason to put 3 Sega characters on a team. So all my roster choices are going to be made according to that. It'll be hard to get as many Sega All-Stars in as possible while sticking to this theme, but I'll try my hardest, and hopefully it's a good enough roster that stays true to this idea. Even Team Sonic Racing kinda struggled with this, like, why is Team Vector made up of these characters? The base game roster will be made up of 7 teams of 3 for a total of 21 characters. That's roughly what Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed had. There's also going to be a sort of bonus team. You'll see what I mean when I get to it. Speaking of which, I'll explain my thought process for these teams and what it could look like as I get to them. I'm not going to be doing tracks or items right now, but maybe if this video does well enough, I can cover them in a sequel. Without further ado, here's my roster concept for Team Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. That title is quite the aneurysm though, so maybe we can just call it Team Sega and All-Stars Racing. Yeah, that's better. The first team is one of the most iconic trios in all of gaming. Team Sonic, made up of Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. This is going to be the only team for now made up of entirely one series' characters, and, unexpectedly, Sonic is going to have the highest number of characters in the roster. This lineup for Team Sonic is a dynamic that's been used frequently in the games, ever since Sonic Heroes in 2003 really, and it feels necessary for a roster like this. There is also a mechanic Team Sonic Racing had where characters of a team were grouped into 3 categories: speed, technique, and power, and had different characteristics based on their category. These 3 fit well, with Sonic being speed, Tails being technique, and Knuckles being power. That's probably going to stay intact for this roster, so keep that in mind for the rest of it. The first character on a team is speed, second is technique, and the third is power. It's not going to be very relevant to the characters I pick though. My second team brings us into the realm of more unconventional choices already. Team Criminal, made up of Sega's greatest thieves, vandals, and scoundrels. Beat from Jet Set Radio, Joker from Persona 5, and the Bonanza Bros from the arcade game of the same name. Beat and the Bonanza Bros have been in Sega racing games before, and are good picks to have. Jet Set Radio's kinda been especially popular lately with a new title on the way, and yes, the Bonanza Bros kinda break the three-man structure, but this is a criminal-based team after all. They're all different types of criminals, a gentleman thief, a kid just making art, and 2 bank robbers, but I figure 4 guys on the run from the law could share a getaway vehicle. Next, I'm basically gonna give this game a dedicated team for some cute mascots, with Team Samba Party. Ai from Monkey Ball, Amigo from Samba de Amigo, and Jack Frost from Shin Megami Tensei. Samba would effectively be the team leader, bringing together some friends to party, which also involves a go-karting expedition. Ai would definitely go along with this, and then with Jack Frost, well, if you should know one thing about Shin Megami Tensei demons, it's that they can basically be recruited for anything if you say the right things. I didn't have room for another Persona character in the base game, so this is sorta more representation for them, in a way. Speaking of teams with a bit of a silly reason to exist, I'm gonna add another one called Sega Taxi Service. Axel from Crazy Taxi and Kasuga and Kiryu, both from Yakuza. Kasuga and Kiryu have both been taxi drivers before, so they could absolutely be connected to Crazy Taxi. Well, Kasuga's was more like Uber Eats, but it's definitely a Crazy Taxi parody. Yakuza is probably big enough to get its own team, but I'm going with this instead. 1, because it's funny, while still fitting with their characters, and 2, it's a good way to bridge together some Sega series and rep Crazy Taxi. BD Joe was the Crazy Taxi character who was actually added to these games, but Axel was recently added to Monkey Ball, so I figure modern Sega might pick him instead. Could be any Crazy Taxi character though. With that, we've got 4 teams down, and half of the base game roster done. Unless you're not counting my super ultra secret bonus team, then we're more than halfway done. My next team is Team Brawler, which is a team up between 3 iconic martial artists of Sega's history. Ryo Hazuki from Shenmue, Akira Yuki from Virtua Fighter, and Axel Stone from Streets of Rage. Ryo and Akira sort of have a connection because Shenmue was first envisioned as a Virtua Fighter spin-off, and they were probably intended to be the same dude, but I figure this team mostly happened when these 3 met and decided to join this tournament to try to hone their skills, only to realize they chose the wrong type of tournament to do so. Also, Akira raced in the same kart as Jackie in these games, but I won't keep that here, since they're both their own full individual human people, and not like these Lego things. It won't be like Bonanza Bros where I can excuse having a duo racer as its own slot. Wait, why did they do that? Like, was it just a reference to Virtua Fighter 3 TV? I don't know why Akira and Jackie are together. Can you believe it? We haven't had any female characters so far. So this next one is Team Girl Power, made up of Amy Rose from Sonic, Aro from Puyo Puyo, and Alice Landale from the very first Phantasy Star game. Puyo Puyo wasn't actually added to any Sonic and Sega All-Stars racing games, but it's still a massive series for them, and did get representation in some crossovers, like Sega Superstar Tennis's Puyo Pop mode. I've also made sure to add a couple of Sonic characters outside of their own team, since it's Sonic. Actually, Sonic characters were surprisingly easy to slot into some other teams, I find. Anyways, huge honorable mention to Karumi from Ninja Princess, the early Sega arcade game that's famous for having a female ninja as a protagonist, who was changed to male for the American version. It's a fascinating, if awful, story, and she wasn't Sega's first female protagonist, but was the first to be something as cool as a ninja, and fits the theme. She was just out-prioritized. That brings us to the final base team, one for the bad guys. Every team-based roster like this needs a villains team, and I've dedicated 2 slots to a Sonic and Puyo Puyo character again, this time Satan and Dr. Eggman. Yes, the villain of Puyo Puyo is Satan. The 3rd slot is Neff from Altered Beast. Since your protagonist is somewhat of a generic beast man, it's a good series for the villain to shine first, and the Demon King Neff is a fairly famous part of it. He was in Wreck-It Ralph, after all, so maybe he could be a consolation prize for all the Wreck-It heads upset I didn't add the big guy himself. He's a shapeshifter, so If this game keeps the feature where vehicles could occasionally transform along the track, I could see him being able to transform in the middle of the race as well. I don't really think they would keep that with the team-based structure though, so he can just transform when you drift or something, I don't know. And there we go, all the normal teams I've included for the base game. But in Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, Sega decided to have characters exclusive to the PC port of the game. Mostly characters they acquired and are known for being on PC. And Team Fortress. I for one think that's stupid. The characters Sega owns, who cares if they were only on the PC before, but I've decided to add a very own Team PC for this game, made up of Pharaoh from Total War, General Winter from Company of Heroes, and Football Manager from Football Manager. Winter and the Manager were both playable in Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, so they can be carryovers here. Sumo Digital is British, so of course they can have Football Manager. As for Pharaoh, Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed had Shogun, who's a generic Shogun to represent Total War Shogun, the first game in the franchise. Since the most recent game in the Total War series is Total War Pharaoh, I can represent that here. So they're a secret, ultra-elusive team that I don't want to be exclusive to PC, but probably would be. I think that's a solid collection of characters for the base game, but there are some big omissions that kind of arise from such a restricted roster format. Don't worry, I think the DLC addresses most of them, but before that, there's the most important character of all we're forgetting about. Who will be the Flag Man? The first game had Knights from Nights into Dreams to act as the Flag Man, and in the sequel it was Ristar. Being the flagman of the races seems like a good consolation prize of sorts to a character's fans, and it's a tradition I want to continue. So who? It sorta has to be someone who can fly, like Ristar or Knights did, or at least someone it makes sense to be on a floating platform. So at first I thought of Zeus from Altered Beast. But that seems a bit lame when Altered Beast is already repped in the roster. Then I thought we could get both Ristar and Knights back to do it together, which could be cool, but I just want to see someone new personally. Then it hit me. Echo the fucking Dolphin. Have Echo the Dolphin be the flagman. Echo is probably one of the Sega characters I've seen requested the most for this series, and screw it, why not? You could basically have him swim around in the air, and that would be like flying, and you know what, it would just be a lot of fun to have. Love that Dolphin. So when I was discussing my Team Sonic list, I mentioned that it was the only one in this base game to be dedicated entirely to one series. I have one more mono-series team though for the DLC. It's made up of 3 characters I figured I couldn't really add individually but would work great as a team. Red, Chuck, and Bob-omb, Team Angry Birds. Sega recently acquired Rovio, and although they haven't put them in any crossovers since it was so recent, they're a good dynamic for something like this, and I could see Sega pushing them hard in the future. They did pay valuable yen for them. And yes, Chuck would be speed, Red would be technique, and Bomb would be power. I just listed out their names as Red, Chuck, and Bomb because, like, it would hurt my brain to say it differently. That's like saying Tails, Knuckles, and Sonic. It's just off. It's just a thing you don't do. My next team brings together 3 fairly big characters from Sega's early history. I never really got to add any characters from the 80s yet besides Neff, but that's on Genesis, it barely counts.
This is bad audio, Kirby and Hell's Jojo. I also forgot Alice is from the 80s.
So here's 3 for Team Classic. Oppa Oppa from Fantasy Zone, Joe Musashi from Shinobi, and Alex Kidd from Alex Kidd. They've all been in this series before, and I associate them pretty heavily with Sega's early Master System / arcade days. There's definitely a bit less of an in-universe explanation for them to be paired together, but we could still figure something out. And besides, we can relax that rule a bit for the DLC. I mean, Team PC definitely doesn't have much of an in-universe explanation. So you can tell by my list that I like fighting games because this next team is the most King of Fighters thing possible. That game series is kind of why I found making rosters like this out of a team structure interesting after all. Anyways, I'm talking about Team Rival. 3 racers who didn't quite make it into the base game, now forming a team to settle the score with racers. I've got Shadow the Hedgehog, Goro Majima, and Jackie Bryant. This team is mostly an excuse to give Sonic, Yakuza, and Virtua Fighter a second rep, but trust me, you add Majima to this game and say this is the only way Kiryu would race against him and people will go crazy for it. Now finally the last team on this roster. If you remember Team Samba Party, that was sorta themed around music already, but this one is specifically Team Idol. My picks are Hatsune Miku, Rise Kujikawa from Persona 4, and Ulala from Space Channel 5. Everyone's favorite musical instrument, Hatsune Miku, isn't owned by Sega, but they publish lots of her games, and she is considered an honorary Sega character by some. If you don't like our first and last guest character, just pretend I added Haruka from Yakuza instead. Then Reset is here because how haven't I added a second Persona character yet, holy shit. And while Ulala isn't an idol per se, she vaguely fits the theme and is a really recognizable Sega character in general. That gives us a final roster of 36. Ai, Akira Yuki, Alex Kidd, Alice Landale, Amigo, Amy Rose, Arl Naja, Axel Stone, Beat, Bomb, Bonanza Bros, Chuck, Dr. Eggman, Football Manager, General Winter, Goro Majima, Hatsune Miku, Ichiban Kasuga, Jack Frost, Jackie Bryant, Joe Musashi, Joker, Kazuma Kiryu, Knuckles, Neff, Opa, Red, Rise Kujikawa, Pharaoh, Ryo Hazuki, Satan, Shadow, Sonic, Tails, and Ulala. Of course, I invite suggestions on how you do something like this in the comments below, and Flagman suggestions. Genuinely want to see what everyone thinks a good Flagman would be. 36 characters might be a little unrealistic for something like this, but I think Sega has a lot more fan bases within its IPs now than it did in the early 2010s, and they might have to put more of a budget into something like this if they ever were to do it. Anyways, the best part of these games, in my opinion, wasn't actually the characters, but the tracks they include, and the genius ways they make these locations into full tracks. I would love to do a list of my own, so make sure this video does well. If you don't, it will be entirely your fault that I get sad and will not be able to do something I find mildly fun because of an arbitrary rule set by me. Entirely your fault. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Also, another secret bonus team, I forgot to add the best character ever, Charlie from Eggs of Steel. So here's Team Egg, Charlie, Egg Robo, and fucking Billy Hatcher. Best fucking roster.